At 60 years old, the body begins to fade. This is an inevitable law of nature. However, by reaching the peak of internal energy, a miracle occurs, a divine rebirth of the earthly body. Bones and muscles are rebuilt to achieve the highest form of martial arts, and the withered body is restored to its former youth. This is the highest achievement that people strive for. The divine sect called it divine awakening, while the shadow sect called it demonic discipline. In the divine sect, 8 people have achieved divine awakening. At the same time, 4 of the shadow sect had mastered demonic discipline. Above them were only the masters from the divine realm, whose body was immune to poison and disease. In 1,000 years, there was only one among the Murim masters. A traditional tea ceremony was taking place in one of the palaces, in which a master who had achieved divine awakening asked a stranger what a sword meant to him. He replied that it was a fine murder weapon with sharp edges. However, that is what it is. A martial art is a martial art, a sword is a sword, and morality is morality. Deep in the dungeon, a mysterious demonic ritual was taking place. Ban came there to fight the master of Crimson Awakening. He took off his dragon head shoulder pads. Ban was truly honored by the opportunity given to him. A master who was highly skilled in swordsmanship could assess the situation even with his eyes closed. When he opened his eyes, he saw not only the master of the Crimson Awakening, but also his comrades were there. Ban guessed that a new ability, soul connection with the undead, was being used against him. The master gave orders to his companions to surround the Ban with a great demonic containment field. The comrades' eyes turned bloodshot as they used demonic seals to attack. It seemed that Banu could no longer be saved. 1,000 demons attacked him at once, but they forgot that they were attacking a true master of the dark arts. Ban used his famous technique, the piercing whirlwind. The basis of the swordsman's energy was steadfastness itself. He defeated 1,000 comrades in just one moment after using his ability. Unperturbed, Ban headed straight towards the cultist. He wasn't afraid of the Ban. He grinned right in the swordsman's face. Will he really use this ability right here and now? The enemies defeated by the swordsman immediately rose from the dead, but they were without flesh. Ban found himself in the midst of an ability unfamiliar to him. It was an unclean ritual of tormenting the soul. The swordsman felt the ground beneath him begin to shake. Even such an experienced martial artist could not assess the situation while in free fall. Without thinking twice, thousands of necromancers attacked the swordsman again at once. Ban fell. The master of the Crimson Awakening looked at his body from the shadows. He took his sword, hoping to take away the Ban's power. He was pleased that everything went as he had planned. Using a lightning-fast blade throw, he betrayed his demonic ally. He didn't expect this from the master. The blade went right through his neck. No one knew what the master of Crimson Awakening was really planning. Bana's bloody sword, no one knows what power it contains. The master revealed his true purpose, as the second living master of the fierce demon was killed. Now he must lead the school of dark arts and conquer all of Murim. All that was left of Ban was his clothes. He was dead. The land of Murim, full of mystical creatures, is a fascinating sight. And suddenly, out of the blue, a phenomenon unusual for this land. Everything is as if in a fog. A storm has sent a sunset of thunder to the earth. Among the smoke, a human silhouette appeared. Who is it? It was none other than the reincarnated swordmaster. Not understanding what had happened to him, he looked up, searching for an answer. Ban didn't understand where he was and where the soul's connection with the undead was. Souls with the undead. Those companions who used this ability that killed Ban. Clarity comes to mind, memories come gradually, but at the same time very quickly. What did those scum of the bloody arts do with Ban? The master also remembered the lost sword, but first he needed to get some clothes in the nearest village. Using the high jump ability, he suddenly remembered that he first used this technique of elevation naked. Sunset all alone, sitting on a tree, thought Ban. Hanging upside down, he experienced hunger, and 2 hours of searching for the village were fruitless. Banu had the idea to cover himself with an animal skin. In the forest, the swordsman came across a forest troll. He looked like a mythical creature from legends. The green creature with huge fangs was not averse to eating a human. A whistle flew past like a bullet, but not right through. What is it? It was Ban's shot. Thanks to his skill and ability, he could even shoot from his finger. The swordsman noticed that something was wrong. He couldn't miss. The shot was right on target. The forest troll's wound was healing. But how? Was it regeneration? But the amazing power of the mystical creature did not stop Ban, and he began to act. The master's hands cut like a blade. This is one of Ban's abilities. The troll clearly did not expect this. But is he really able to regenerate even after such a blow? The troll's wound healed again. The body of the creature that had received such damage regenerated again. Ban remembered the words of the sage. In order to survive, there was one technique that was superior to others, a blow of vital energy that will leave no chance for the forest ogre. But the troll didn't need to be destroyed. Ban wanted to try roasting it. The 3-meter forest ogre didn't even have time to blink before the master disappeared from sight. Hands cut like a sword, the troll's head from the shoulders. After landing after a successful attack, Ban notices something unusual. The ogre had green blood, perhaps because he was a mystical creature. After defeating the troll, Ban, without thinking twice, lit a fire and began to roast the ogre. The master wondered why the forest creature didn't have a soul stone. Maybe he was still young. But in any case, Ban heard that the meat of the mystical creature had a beneficial effect on health. But it wasn't very tasty, and it smelled even worse. Somewhere in the middle of the mountain range, Ban remembered again that there were no people nearby. Not even traces of them. Breathtaking scenery, clean air, cool night breeze, even the moons are shining. Taking a closer look, Ban jumped up. Was it really just his imagination that there really was? In the sky, there were 2 moons, a phenomenon the Swordmaster had never seen before. There was an empire called Kratos on this new land, in the castle where the morning feast took place, at which they usually discussed something. The dark-haired lord watched silently as the king ate his breakfast. Afterwards, he turned to his majesty, who was still enjoying his breakfast. The lord begged the young king to eat properly rather than breakfast like a commoner. The king slammed his steel cup down on the table and turned to the lord. The king told the lord that they had lost most of the empire's lands. The lord wanted his majesty to eat healthy food, but he ordered him to be silent. The lord told the news that Corinth was sending an ambassador to them. He thinks they want them to clear the lands of mythical creatures. The young master thought about the lord's words and wanted to find his own benefit in this proposal. After all, his army was seasoned in battle, and the military skill of the previous emperor was hidden by his own suicide. The young emperor spoke so rudely that he almost broke the table. His Majesty Frank von Great considered such options to kindle the fire for future revenge. After 2 days of wandering, Bana, while walking through the forest, came across someone's house. He found it strange because he had never seen houses like this. A black and white guard dog ran out towards the master of the dark arts. But the puppy did not attack him, but only stepped on Ban's leg with his paw. The dog barked, which apparently confused the residents of the forest house. Ban didn't expect to see anyone. A little girl came out of the house and saw a stranger next to her faithful friend. The blue-eyed girl asked the stranger who he was and what he was doing here. Ban was confused. The first thing he thought was whether she could pose a danger to him. The master of the dark arts did not understand a word the little girl said, but she in turn noticed that he was wearing clothes made from a mythical creature. The girl's mother ran out after her, thinking that her child was in danger. Ban immediately wanted to apologize, but remembered that they would not understand a word he said. The mother said that they had nothing for him, and if he was planning something bad, she threatened the stranger that her husband and son would soon return home. Ban, who had picked up the dog, stood there thinking that they didn't look like the pale-skinned ones from his past world. The girl in turn told her mother that he didn't look like a villain. The master of the dark arts pointed his finger at the mother, and the woman, confused, also pointed her finger at herself. Then Ban pointed with both hands at his clothes. None of them understood each other, what he wanted to say by this. The imperturbable Ban didn't know if they could understand him in sign language. The evil mother said that the stranger had shown his true nature and asked the girl to quickly call her father, but she replied that she thought the uncle had asked for some clothes. While they stood there wondering whether they were enemies or not, the little puppy lay down on the ground and fell asleep. Having come to the general conclusion that they were not enemies, Ban thought about the girl's name. Her name was Taria. He had never heard such names before in his lands. He was also given clothes that he considered strange. The mother praised the swordsman. The clothes she gave him looked very good on him, for which Ban thanked her with a hand gesture from his past world. The swordmaster turned sharply and walked in the other direction, which greatly surprised the mother and girl and perhaps made them a little wary. Ban approached the place where his father usually chopped wood and picked up an axe, which made his mother ask Taria to call her father quickly. The master of the dark arts only wanted to thank the family who gave him the clothes. The woman breathed a sigh of relief. Taria shouted to the uncle, causing Ban to stop chopping wood. The swordmaster still didn't understand their language. The blue-eyed girl only noted that he was very strong, because she had never seen anyone chop wood with one hand. Ban addressed Taria in his native language. He wanted to know what kind of tool he used to chop wood. But they didn't understand him just as he didn't understand them. And the mother again became a little wary, because next to her daughter stood a stranger with an axe. The girl's eyes sparkled, because she was interested in explaining to the stranger what firewood is and what an axe is. Ban looked at Tarja in surprise and repeated words unknown to him after her. This made the girl even more interested, and she asked the wanderer to ask her something else, since she so wanted to teach him her language. Ban thought to himself that he shouldn't rush into anything, because the most important thing for him now was to learn to speak a foreign language. Several months later, while wandering and exploring the new world, the master of the dark arts learned the local language and came to a local resident for one thing. Holding out his hand, the man said that it was a map of these lands that he had been looking for a long time. Ban curiously snatched the card from the man's hands and thanked him. But then he ran into a difficulty. He learned the language, but reading was still a problem. The man noticed this and made fun of Ban a little, saying that it was okay. He still had his best years ahead of him. To which the master of the dark arts lied a little, saying that he understood well what was written there. The man encouraged Ban, because it seemed like only yesterday the swordsman was diligently gesturing to explain what he wanted. Ban replied that it was all thanks to Mr. Blair's family, because the blue-eyed girl could not get enough of talking to him. Ban was chopping wood and thought to himself that this was a great map, not only geographically, but there were also unique features of the village. The logs flew one after another, and the master of the dark arts kept thinking about his past. His dark past. Ban has to come to terms with the circumstances he finds himself in. He has no choice but to accept it. How to accept the fact that he cannot return to Miram only by the technique of great exaltation. Even while thinking, he mechanically continued chopping wood, one of which almost hit Tarja, who came too close. Ban told the girl that it was dangerous here. She should move away. Looking at him, the girl called the swordsman by a nickname that she herself made up. She called him Dark. To which the master of the dark arts replied that he had already told her that his name was Ban, not Dark. Tarja found this very funny because, in her native language, the name Ban means dark smell. She laughed so much that she thought she would die laughing. The joyful child pointed her finger at the master of the dark arts and said Dark, causing Ban to fall into a stupor from Tarja's persistence. The blue-eyed girl noted that the name Dark perfectly suited his black eyes and hair. Ban replied to Tarja that she could call him whatever she wanted, as long as she left him alone and didn't interfere with his work. Having decided to take a little rest, Ban leaned on the ground and asked the girl what a mercenary was, and she answered that they were people who fought for money. Was she comparing him to an assassin? The master of the dark arts thought. He answered her that he was not like them. Surprised, Tarja looked straight into Ban's eyes and asked him who he was then, if he was not a mercenary or an assassin. With a sigh, the swordsman replied to the little girl that he was a master of the school of dark arts who only wanted to find his way home. Blue-eyed Tarja said, "Why shouldn't Banu look for work in the mercenary guild? The mercenary guild is a place where mercenaries gather, where they receive orders and trade information." Ban thought about Tarja's words. He definitely needed to get at least some information in order to return home. And he also asked her how she knew about the mercenary guild. The girl told the master of the dark arts that her brother ran away from home, saying that he would become a mercenary, but his father found him and brought him back. This story made Ban laugh a lot. Meanwhile, the king was surveying his lands from the highest point of his castle, but suddenly he notices that one of his subjects is heading towards him. It was Captain Rognard. Perhaps he came with good news. He asked the king not to worry. The young ruler replied that he could not calm down, because he needed to send 2,000 palace maids to meet the needs of the Corinte. He bit his lip very hard without even noticing what was said, because these were his people. The captain replied that all they could do was increase their fighting strength to counter the Corinth, and that the king's anxiety would only increase if the ruler thought about such mundane problems as this. The emperor got angry and asked Rognard if the maids were ready to leave. The captain replied that they would be delivered to Corinth in a week. It is worth remembering that there was also a case when Corinth kidnapped the maids 10 years ago and demanded new ones. The captain asked the king to be calm, because he would be leading the escort. Looking to the side, the emperor and Rognard noticed a silhouette walking towards them. It was Lord Tozier. They were wondering what news he came with. Bowing his head down, the lord said that he had failed the task given to him. The emperor noted that this was the 5th time the lord had failed to complete his task, and also asked if there was any use in the Anfiros journal. The Anfiros journal contains no information about the past Axion, only a little about its research. The kingdom knows the theory, but they can't do detailed experiments yet. However, the lord said that 90% of the theory was already ready. He would do his best to fill in the missing 10% of information. Turning to the emperor, the lord begged to give him a little more time to study, to which the king replied that he would give him one last chance. The king's eyes still burn with hope that with the help of this artifact, he will be able to provide a better life for his empire. For Mr. Blair's family, the news was not so good, Ban decided to leave. The mother and children were very saddened by this event because they had become so close lately. Extending his hand to shake hands with the head of the family, the master of the dark arts jokingly apologized for being a burden all this time, to which Mr. Blair replied to Ban that he was mistaken. He had become part of their family, and he could always return no matter what happened. To which the master of the dark arts replied that he had learned the culture of this world, and it had brought him great benefit. During the farewell, the son asked his father for permission to go on a journey with Ban, because the boy still had an unfulfilled dream of becoming a mercenary, to which the head of the family threatened the boy that if he ran away again, he would get twice as much as before, to which the boy replied that he was missing the best chance in life to become not a simple farmer but a mercenary. Ban, who got down on one knee, did not forget to say goodbye to his noticeably grown four-legged friend, who even shed his stingy dog tear in farewell. A small blue-eyed girl walked up to the swordsman and grabbed his clothes with one hand, sadness in her eyes. Taria said that her beloved Dark would regret leaving, because if he stayed and waited a few more years, he would have a lovely bride. It seemed that Ban had never been so embarrassed in his life as he was after what the little blue-eyed girl said. The master of the dark arts told her that, unfortunately, their age difference was too big, and he also didn't want to be beaten by her father. Ban finally said that he didn't know if they would meet again, but he would never forget her. After all, Taria was the one who gave the swordsman his name, Dark. The master of the dark arts patted the little blue-eyed girl on the head, and she in turn burst into tears from the grief of the upcoming separation. The head of the family and the mother with the dog silently watched as one of the family members left. The four-legged one even somehow waved a handkerchief to his departing friend. There is no way back, Ban thought to himself, and began to walk away slowly but confidently. The dog barked at the top of his voice. The children waved their hands and shouted after their departing friend. The head of the family and the mother froze in place and silently looked at their departing, one might say, son. Ban turned one last time to his family, who had helped him as best they could, but he had a long way to go, the main goal being to return to Murim. As he left, Ban also repeated the gesture with his hands that meant farewell in these lands. Then he turned around and continued to wander on his long journey. Night, the sky was covered with the twinkling of stars. In the sky, there was also a rare phenomenon for this world, when the second moon had not yet had time to join the other, because in these lands there were two of them. In the darkness of the night, a silhouette can be seen sitting by the fire, waiting for dinner to be prepared. Suddenly, unexpectedly, in the bushes of pitch darkness, red, as if bloodshot eyes lit up. Having waited for the delicacy to be prepared, the swordsman immediately began to eat it. However, noticing that he was being followed, Ban did not show any sign. His sense of smell and vision never failed him. At that very second, the enemy appeared before the master of the dark arts. They were werewolves, with huge fangs and claws, thirsting for only one thing: fresh human flesh. With only a thirst for blood, the werewolves decided that the swordsman would be an easy target for them and immediately went on the attack. Ban was prepared for anything, but he clearly did not expect such speed from the mystical creature. The enemy was very fast. After successfully dodging the enemy's attack with his ascension ability, the master finally understood why people always avoided this mountain. The master of the dark arts assessed the situation and decided to counterattack, using his famous technique of the smashing hand. He clearly caught the beast off guard with his powerful attack, but at this stage of his journey, the swordsman already knew that mystical creatures possessed regeneration. Unperturbed, Ban gathered all the power of dark energy for a final attack. The regenerating beast, who clearly failed to assess the situation and the abilities of the one he was attacking, could only rely on his instincts, growling and baring his fangs in the face of his enemy. With a slight movement of his hand, Ban, who had accumulated energy for the attack, left a shining mark in the form of a palm on the beast's chest, which was fatal for the werewolf. The other mystical creatures clearly did not expect this, watching as their leader flew away a couple of dozen meters. The beasts roared their battle cry in hopes of intimidating the swordmaster. Ban, in turn, was only thinking about what a good mannequin he would make for the School of Bloody Arts. The beast could even make a good carpet. Noticing that the man was not the least bit frightened, the mystical creatures seemed to read his thoughts and rushed away, abandoning their dead leader. The evil master, looking at the fleeing creatures, did not understand what the point was in attacking him, because he had only dropped the freshly cooked meat in vain. Gritting his teeth, Ban picked up the body of the dead werewolf. Because why let good things go to waste? This beast would look good on a flaming spit, Ban thought. The emperor, sitting on the throne, propped his head up with his hand, crossed his legs, and apparently expected at least some good news. Lord Tozer came to the young king with news, saying that this was very urgent information. He told the emperor that they had a great opportunity to take possession of the dragon's heart. Jumping up from his throne, the young king was eager for the smallest details and could not wait for the lord to tell him in detail. Tozer told the emperor that the dragon's heart was kept in the Great Drow Temple in Corinth, and word came from the front that the Trovian Empire would lend it for a time. The king said that they must intercept it at any cost. After all, the dragon's heart was a huge clot of dense and pure mana, and the lord also said that he thought the artifact's protection would be weak. Tozer said that the Corinthian Empire believed that no one would even dare to encroach on such an artifact. The emperor asked the lord how weak the security there was that Tozer made such bold statements. The lord replied to the young king that, according to the information, there were only 50 knights guarding the heart and only one master, adding that the master did not even have a titanium. The emperor thought, a master without a titan? Perhaps this is a deliberate leak of information from the Corinth. There is no doubt that this information is reliable, and the young king gave the order to act immediately. Wandering between forests, mountains, and rivers, the swordmaster moves only forward in search of at least some information. Along the way, he noticed that the land that was new to him was undoubtedly richer in oxygen than Murim. He had never felt such powerful forest energy. Looking at his hands, he thought that every little bit of energy was restored almost immediately, so it would be much easier for anyone to practice and master martial arts. The swordsman also wondered what kind of martial arts were practiced here. Suddenly, a fair-haired girl appears in his path, screaming for the traveler to stop. The young girl asked where the traveler was heading. The master of the dark arts told her that he was on his way to Vulcania, and in response, he heard a demand for payment of 10 silver coins. Stunned by the stranger's impudence, the swordmaster grinned sarcastically in her face, replying that the price was too high, since his clothes were worth only 7 silver coins. To which Ban heard in response that if he had nothing to pay with, then let him try swimming. Maybe he would succeed. The master of the dark arts just laughed right in the girl's face and found her words very funny. In an instant, he rushed past, asking if she was sure of her words. The young girl, in turn, took this as a humiliation and instantly drew her blade in order to cut the swordmaster. But the foolish stranger didn't know who she was trying to raise her sword against. Ban stopped the attack attempt in a matter of seconds, grabbing the attacker's hand and squeezing it hard. Then, with a deft movement, he moved his hand to the blue-eyed robber's neck, causing her to blush, and in that position could only wheeze. Ban asked her how much money she had. She replied that she had nothing at all. That's why she was robbing. But the swordmaster made it clear with just one look that he had no intention of listening to lies. Very frightened, the stupid girl only had time to wonder what the dark-haired wanderer would do to her. Staring furiously at her own helplessness, the tied-up robber, who was left without part of her clothing, kept glaring at Ban. Not a bad catch on the way to Vulcania, Ban thought. These clothes must be worth something. He also did not leave such a trophy as a sword without attention. Perhaps it will remain with him. The girl can only think about her actions because she could not even do anything. After a long silence, she asked to be released, to which the unperturbed Ban replied that he would release her for 10 silver coins. To which the girl, in a fit of anger, replied that he was a stranger and had already taken her clothes and that she really didn't have any money. The master of the dark arts decided to check if the girl was lying to him. He lifted her up with one hand, starting to shake her, trying to hear the ringing of coins. But in fact, she didn't have any money. To which the unwavering Ban replied that since there were no coins, they would have to swim. The robber's eyes widened in fear. With one left hand, the swordsman threw her straight into the bay. The girl in turn screamed very loudly, threatening with the promise that someday they would meet again and that this meeting would be fatal for the master of the dark arts. In response to cries of violence, Ban merely waved goodbye. Further action will take place in the city of Volcano, where, in one of the local pubs, the wanderer idolized the local alcohol. Suddenly, he overheard a conversation at a nearby table about an unknown place through which the path to Chenin lies. With one glance, Ban analyzed that these were seemingly ordinary people who were also drinking fresh, tasty ale. One of them told Mede that she looked as if she had never been to these lands, and that it would be much faster to go through the gate. The red-haired girl in turn replied that there was a dragon's lair there, a very strong dragon. Watching and eavesdropping on the conversation, the traveler was very interested in listening to it to the end. At the table, they suggested ending the argument and continuing to enjoy fresh drinks. The guy in the red robe asked his friend if he had ever seen dragons before. After a pause, the swordsman nevertheless dared to ask the company opposite if he had heard correctly that they were heading to Chenin. The answer was positive. One of them asked how he could help the stranger. Ban told them that he was also on his way to Chenin. but he did not know how to get there and asked permission if he could continue his journey in their company. After some thought, the smart guy weighed the pros and cons. He said that he thought it would be difficult to travel with the sword that Ban had, and also asked Ban what he needed the sword for, perhaps to fight monsters. The stranger also added that the blade of the saber would not pierce even the skin of a monster, let alone an animal, since this weapon was intended for duels against people. The guy from the company also noted that this weapon is most often used by women for self-defense, asking Ban if this was definitely his weapon. Ban immediately realized that the guy looked experienced. He would be good as a companion. In turn, the master of the dark arts promised that he would not become a burden on the journey after asking permission to examine the guy's sword. The guy did not refuse the wanderer's request and handed him the sword, but something alerted Ban. The master of the dark arts saw something particularly familiar in the sword. The guy noted the dark-haired traveler's good observation skills, asking him how he realized that this sword was magical. The stranger's words confused Ban. He did not quite understand what he was talking about. The swordsman, who is a master of the dark arts, stood like a statue and asked the company what a magic sword was. The guy looked at him and asked the stranger if he really didn't know what kind of sword it was. Ban explained that he had lived in a village before, and with eyes full of curiosity, asked for an explanation. The answer was as simple as possible, because it is a weapon that can use spells. Supplementing the answer, the guy also told that it can be used exclusively for spells with which the sword was enchanted, and it also absorbs a large amount of mana. But this is a huge privilege for using magic alone. Ban looked at the narrator with genuine surprise and asked what mana was then. Another participant of the feast joined the conversation, shouting about how it is possible not to know what mana is, and also not to know the basics of this world. Ban was surprised, realizing that these basics are the usual standard knowledge of this world. The master of the dark arts may have looked like a fool in this situation, but he couldn't do anything about it. He repeated that until recently he lived in the village, hoping that the unknown would be explained to him. The second guy who got into the conversation was named Gaston. He asked in which village the wanderer lived. Ban told him that the village was located behind the Trebark Mountain, which made the green-haired boy give in to surprise. Both guys assumed that the wanderer was not lying to them. If he really lived in such a deserted area, then his ignorance was not surprising, and a request was also made to Gaston to explain the basics to the traveler. Gaston, his eyes wide, began to explain that mana is the source of energy that drives this world. Every living being has it to some degree. Just as an experienced warrior stores as much mana as possible in his body, a wizard can use his body as a storage to absorb the mana around him and turn it into a spell. Gaston explains that a normal person using the mana needed to live can die. Also pointing to the blade, he said that the magic sword allows the use of magic, but if used by normal people, the blade will absorb too much mana, and this will become a problem. Absorbing the knowledge, Ban thought to himself that if the mana in this world was the chi energy he was using, now he understood why the blade absorbed a bit of it when he picked it up. There was also a dialogue in which Ban noted that the blade looked quite light despite its size, to which he received the answer that it had an automatic spell that would not have to be cast over and over again. But the most important thing is that these are manual spells. The guy extended his hand with the magic sword Banu, offering to try to cast the spell Fireblade. Taking the blade in his hands, Ban cast the spell the guy had said. The master of dark arts was amazed beyond measure. The sword instantly became red-hot. It was something incredible, Ban thought. Just a little energy for such an effect and without knowledge of solar arts. The surprised master of the dark arts wondered if he could use other spells. The guy replied that the sword has a power shield that allows you to block arrows. Also, the blade is not expensive, but very useful. Ban's sense of smell is second to none. He sensed danger at the moment, recognizing that an arrow was flying at him. The unperturbed swordsman decided to test his new knowledge and skills by actually using the force shield spell. The blade seemed to howl, surrounding Ban with an energy shield. No one had time to understand what had actually happened. The wanderer cast a spell, and out of nowhere an arrow flew in and broke on the shield. The shooter exhaled. He couldn't understand what went wrong. The shot was right on target. Ban noted that the blade is very effective, asking the company if the sword has offensive magic. The guy told the wanderer that he needed to point the sword at the target and cast the fireball spell. At the same second, the Ban, having received the information, cast a fireball spell, pointing the blade in the direction where the potential shooter was located. The spell was so destructive it was a high concentration of energy. The dark scarlet color darkened the room, then flew out the window. Everyone in the pub was shocked by what was happening. There were so many questions and so few answers. The spell flew straight towards the attacker. Ban really caught him off guard. There was a powerful explosion not far from the pub, but it was unclear whether Ban had missed. Apparently, the shooter was having a lucky day. The dark arts master thought to himself that this blade would be revered as a gift from heaven in the Murima world. But was it really a common thing here? The others were watching the fleeing shooter at this time. The comrades whispered among themselves. Gaston told Narek that he couldn't even imagine how much mana it would take to create such a powerful fireball. Narek in turn whispered that he had never created such a destructive fireball in his life. During all the events, a girl appeared before the ban, introducing herself as Mineria. She also noted that she is a servant of the goddess of the earth Karis. Ban introduced himself with a name that was not familiar to him. He said that his name was Dark. She in turn noted that the arrow apparently was intended for him. The traveler replied that he was not sure who or why, but only one face came to mind. And he added with a grin that he did not remember doing anything bad recently that would make someone come for him. Mineria suggested that the arrow could have been intended for the fair-haired Mikkel, who asked her in surprise why she had decided so. The girl added that if she had rushed past Dark and flown straight, then the target would have been Mikkel instead of the Wanderer. The blonde guy said that he could think of too many people who could do it. Other comrades suggested catching up with the shooter, since he wouldn't run far with a wounded leg. But one of them suggested that the attacker could be a member of the Thieves' Guild, which could become a real problem for them. Narek, as it turned out, was the most important one in the group, so they turned to him for an order, and he, in turn, suggested going on a journey right now. The red-haired girl stopped the boss, because Mikkel had a good reason to be late before leaving for Shannon. He had not finished his drink yet. The girl took on the role of commander for a moment and ordered everyone to hurry up with the ale and move out immediately. Mikkel suggested that if the attacker was from the Thieves' Guild, then this pub might be in danger. They could be surrounded at any moment. Narek gave the final order to prepare for the sortie and departure on the journey, bypassing any possible threat, and also ordered everyone to make sure they were properly armed. Ban, aka Dark. By coincidence, he got a horse nicknamed Black Death. He followed everyone, because his companions knew the way. And so the group, consisting of the new comrades of the Master of the Dark Arts, set off on an adventure. On the way, Dark turned to Gaston, remembering his words that Gaston does not know how to use a sword because he is a wizard, so why is he so well armed? The comrade replied that it was all to hide the fact that he was a wizard, and in any case, wizards were always a primary target. Ban grinned and replied that he understood what Gaston was talking about. On the way, Narek turned to Dark, recalling his words that he was 25 years old, adding that Ban was much younger. The leader thought that the swordsman was the same age as Jaime and Raven. Dark replied that he heard that a lot, thinking to himself that if he said he was over 70 years old, he would most likely look like a psycho. Narek assumed that hunting monsters in the Treybark Mountains was quite profitable. For the first time, he sees a novice traveler who bought a horse. Following the route indicated by the boss, Dark and his comrades passed by the Imperial Knights. At that moment, the Narek ordered his horse to be quieter, because the clatter of the ungulates made his horse nervous. Dark, in turn, did not miss the moment and managed to take a good look at the knights. The Master of the Dark Arts noted the soldiers' good equipment. Having passed by a column of warriors, the Narek told the Dark that they were Baron Asmon, the son of the Baron and the Master. The swordsman also wondered who the Masters were. Mikkel, who picked up the conversation, said that Masters are those who have mastered the flow of mana, adding that even in Corinta, the strongest empire, there are less than 1,000 of them, and in such a small empire as Trovia, there are only 34. Dark's interest knew no bounds as to whether these masters were really that good. Mikhail told him that out of those 50 warriors, Baron Asmon was the only master, and that this master could easily defeat the other 49 knights. Dark, who continued on his way, riding on the Black Death, did not understand anything from the story of the fair-haired Mikhail. Turning around in search of answers, the Master of the Dark Arts only looked contemptuously at the warriors' backs. Knights? These third-rate ones weren't even close to Dark's morning warm-up, so what's so good about them? The swordsman asked himself an unanswerable question. Night fell in the lands new to the Master of the Dark Arts, and the company began preparing dinner. Mineria began to pour out the soup strewn with various delicacies. Perhaps in the future they will be able to become not only comrades but also real friends, who knows? But for now, the whole team is content with dinner. But Narek and Mikkel are in no hurry. They are discussing something on the side. The fair-haired man began the dialogue by saying that if the shooter really was from the Thieves' Guild, then they should set up an ambush right here. The leader replied that it would be more difficult for them to attack them further from the city. Continuing the dialogue, Narek noted that if the enemies did come, then today, starting from tomorrow, the leader planned to turn off the main road, but they would run into monsters. Their dialogue was interrupted by Manhwa, who called them to dinner. The thicket of the forest looks like an ideal shelter, but at the same time a very vulnerable location. A pair of legs hung from the tree trunk, and surprisingly, certain areas of the forest were well lit. Sitting on the tree was a green-eyed elf with a bow on her back. She was asking the strangers what exactly their enemy looked like. The blonde girl explained that the enemy had long black hair and was a little over 20 years old, dressed exclusively in traveler's clothes, without armor. Could this really be the robber that Dark threw into the bay? Suddenly, the elf was able to determine the approximate location of the target with her own eyes. It was possible that she could see something that others could not. Perhaps it was her combat skills. She was able to determine that the distance to the target was about 400 meters. Could this really be the man the blonde robber told her about? The elf wondered. Darka's instincts never failed him. It was as if he saw her too. Perhaps they even crossed eyes. The elf thought the same thing. Or perhaps it just seemed that way to her. She looked down at her comrades who had previously described Dark's skills as incredible. And speculation began, because they did not know how skillfully Dark wielded a sword. But his skills in close combat had previously been amazing. The blonde added that she could not do anything to him. The shooter added that Dark seemed to be skilled in magic as well, as he blocked his arrow perfectly with a magic shield and shot a fireball at him out of nowhere. The elf was very interested in the stories of her comrades, and she paid special attention to the ability of the fireball. It was already deep night and 2 moons appeared in the sky. Almost the entire company was already asleep, because in the morning they had to continue on their way. Gaston sat by the fire. Something had disturbed him. Dark was located at the farthest point of the camp. The wizard approached the swordsman, asking him to come closer and warm himself by the fire. Dark showed no signs of attention, as if he was already seeing his third dream, but sitting. Gaston noticed this. Could he have fallen asleep in this position, he thought? No matter how much he looked at him, he could not understand. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the whistle of an arrow rang out through the forest thicket. The arrow flew straight at Dark. But the master of the dark arts was always ready for anything, and with one sure movement of the blade separated the arrow. This arrow was not a simple one. It was enchanted with unknown magic. After separation, pink runes appeared between the 2 halves. Nobody expected this. There was a loud explosion. One can assume that it was heard in all parts of the forest. Everyone immediately woke up. Narek was in confusion. No one yet understood what was happening. The team grouped into a defensive position. An order was given for the priestess to heal Dark. The main task was to reveal the location of the attacker. Manhwa leaned over the prone swordsman and silently asked only that he hold on until she cast the spell. But Dark is not so easy to break. With a sharp movement, he instantly raised his body, apparently. Only his clothes were damaged. His comrades told the swordsman not to strain himself. The priestess would soon heal him. But the master of the dark arts replied that he was fine. Dark noticed that in reality only his clothes were damaged, but he still could not understand whether the arrow was truly imbued with magic. Gaston got ahead of him, telling him that there were spells that could increase the killing power of an arrow. Before he could finish speaking, Dark did not listen to the wizard to the end. Using the technique of great exaltation, he immediately soared into the sky. The elf saw the enemy approaching. She was so amazed by his devilish speed that she could not even determine the course of her further actions. Directed only forward, Dark did not care what danger might await him. In his opinion, his combat experience was enough to defeat any enemy. The elf decided not to wait until the enemy came close. She decided to shoot another arrow after him. But Dark was prepared for anything. He used the illusionary art of the rising sword. It was a technique that only the masters of the dark school of arts possessed. The swordsman aimed his blade straight at the enemy's magically imbued arrow. There was an explosion, the destructive power of which exceeded the first one. Most likely, this explosion was heard not only in the forest, but also in the nearest cities. The elf did not understand whether she had reached her goal, whether she had managed to defeat her enemy. Suddenly, Dark caught her off guard, pointing his blade straight at her, looking like he had no intention of playing her games anymore. The elf, clearly trained in quite a few techniques, could do nothing to counter Dark's approaching speed. One moment and he will be at his destination. Dark didn't chop her into small pieces, but with a powerful blow of his fist, thanks to his internal energy, he sent the elf into a deep sleep. Thanks to the technique of instantly assessing the situation, the master of the dark arts noticed that the enemy was not alone. Using his ability, he instantly directed a powerful stream of energy directly at the enemy who was below him. The second enemy fell very quickly, but apparently Dark calculated the amount of energy so as not to kill the enemy, but to neutralize it. Suddenly, a third enemy appears, a guy whose crossbow was pointed straight at the master of the dark arts. The enemy fired a shot from the crossbow in the hopes that he could finish off the swordsman. But with just one movement of the hand, the arrow, into which all the shooter's hope had been invested, was caught. Confused, the robber had nowhere to go. He could not match the devilish speed of the Dark. Swinging his blade, the Dark Arts Master was about to make his final attack. Swinging his blade, Dark was surprised that his opponent was able to dodge his incredibly fast strike. The enemy had no choice but to fall to his knees and hope for the best. The Master approached him and began to examine him closely. Dark began to take off his clothes, figuring that since they had ruined his attire, they should pay with their own. The Master stopped at nothing. He even began to take off his opponent's pants. The guy in turn resisted, but he saw the grin of death, and it was as if there was no resistance, after which the guy screamed at the top of his lungs, hoping that at least someone would come to his aid. The scream reached the camp with his comrades. They were completely unaware of what was happening on the other side of the forest. Dark, who had changed his clothes, began to interrogate the attacker about the reason for their attack, since he had not done anything bad to them. The bound but alive opponents were in no hurry to answer the swordsman's question. Most likely, they were hatching a plan on how to get out and try their luck again in defeating the master of the dark arts. The elf asked Dark a question, the essence of which was what the devilish thing the swordsman had done to the guy with the crossbow that made him scream so loudly throughout the forest. The master of the dark arts replied that he hadn't done anything to him. He had simply passed out from fear. It was so pathetic on the guy's part that Dark only looked at him for a second, feeling disgust. Jokes aside, Dark was serious. He began to ask the girls why they attacked him, offering to answer nicely. Otherwise, he would make them beg him to kill them as soon as possible. The little blonde girl, gritting her teeth furiously, answered the swordsman that they attacked him because he attacked a member of the Vulcanian Thieves Guild and robbed her without even the Thieves Guild's knowledge. To the rage of the pretty robber, the Dark responded calmly that he had always felt safe from the very beginning, that he was safe and sound, and that a gang like them would never be a threat to him. He added that if this was indeed the true reason for the attack, then there was no point in him killing them, to which the robber was very surprised. The elf, defeated with one hand, looked at Dark brazenly and said that he was too self-confident, since he was not afraid of the Thieves Guild, which had a certain power in certain parts of the land. The master of the dark arts thought about what the elf had said. Indeed, he thought, if he left them alive, they would try to find him again to kill him. With just one look at the two tied-up girls, he made it clear that he might have changed his mind about their future fate, which made them squeal throughout the forest, shouting what he was going to do with them. To their question, Dark, grinning maliciously, replied that even he himself could not know what he would get into his head to do with them. Ban spared the thieves, taking not their lives, but their clothes. But even with this outcome of the circumstances, the robbers were not happy, threatening Dark with reprisals. He answered them that he hoped that next time they would be dressed in something more expensive than pants, and also adding that if they continued to threaten him, he would take his underwear too, after which the robbers instantly fell silent, because what would it be like for them to be left in the depths of the forest, tied up, without panties? Dark also took the horses and headed towards his camp, but the green-eyed girl still could not calm down, saying to herself that she would definitely kill the swordsman someday. The elf, thinking about what had happened for a long time, suggested not to try to kill him in the future, to which the enraged robber asked her how she could say such a thing, since Dark had defamed their honor and dignity. The elf added that Dark was too strong. Revenge was of course good, but looking at the truth, it was beyond their power. Remembering just one look from the master of the dark arts, she felt uneasy, and in the end she asked the robber about what honor and dignity a thief could have, continuing to say that if she was so thirsty for revenge, let her continue it herself. Fear was visible in the elf's eyes. Next time Dark might not show mercy and take not their clothes, but their own lives. The victorious Dark was already at the threshold of the camp, and he also had 3 horses with him. It was still hard to see anything in the night, but in the shadows, Dark saw familiar silhouettes. They were his comrades. The whole team was surprised. Dark returned safe and sound, in different clothes, and even with horses. Anticipating questions from his comrades, the master of the dark arts said that these beauties belonged to those who were hostile to him, continuing that his opponents simply bored him, so he stole the horses. Dark was asked what he had done that in the middle of the night, in the depths of the forest, an enchanted arrow suddenly whistled straight at him. The swordmaster told them a story that on the way to Vulcania, a girl tried to rob him. In the background of the story, a red-haired girl admired her pet. After, Narek asked if Dark reported the robbery to the guards, to which the master of the dark arts replied that he had not reported anything to the guards, he had only taken her things and weapons, and then tied her up and thrown her into the river, and the red-haired girl laughed very loudly at what she heard. Narek said that if the girl was in the Thieves' Guild, then this would be a problem for a long time, and also mentioned that this was far from the wisest thing Dark did, to which the swordmaster replied to the leader that if it was really so dangerous then he could continue the journey alone, so as not to impose himself on anyone. Mikhail entered the conversation and consoled Narek, telling him that he shouldn't worry, because Dark had just taken the blast and survived without a single scratch on him. Mikhail continued, adding that even if he was from the village, his fortitude far surpassed theirs, and Dark did not need their advice. Narek agreed with the blonde's words. Yawning loudly, Mikhail suggested continuing to sleep. At this moment, Gaston felt multiple mana responses in another part of the forest. It looked like a group of knights. He determined it by the quality of the mana. Surprised, Mikhail, who was already about to take a nap, asked how many there were approximately, to which the wizard replied that there were a lot. About 50 or about 100. Narek was confused by this. Such a number of knights in such a place and at such a time. In his memory, this had happened for the first time. Gaston, with his magical powers, sensed that the battle had already begun, because the mana responses were slowly fading. Mineria immediately rushed to the side where Gaston was looking. Mikhail called her to understand what she wanted to do, to which the priestess replied that this was a battle between knights, that she must act immediately, hurry, get to the battlefield as quickly as possible to heal the knights before they were hurt, to which Mikhail shouted after her that they didn't know anything. If she had rushed there recklessly, then no one knew what could happen. The priestess was faster than ever. She hurried with all her might to have time to apply her healing knowledge to the wounded knights. Dark also caught up with her, perhaps because he could not leave his comrade alone on the battlefield. The rest hurried after them, and if they didn't fall asleep, then everyone did. Dark noticed that the others were lagging behind. Most likely they couldn't keep up because of the armor they were wearing. The swordmaster wondered if he should pick up the priestess and rush faster, because she couldn't keep up with him either. The master of the dark arts immediately returned for the priestess, took her in his arms and sped up to the battlefield, focusing on the sound of the battle. The priestess fell to her knees next to the first wounded warrior she came across. Dark analyzed what was happening behind the priestess. It looked like there was no one left to heal. Kneeling next to the mountain of corpses, the priestess screamed that these were the knights of Raken and that no one was left alive. Gaston, standing in a stupor, could not understand who could have done such a thing to the valiant knights, because they were different. But the Raken warriors were good. Narek immediately assumed that killing Raken knights in the lands of Trovia was madness. Maybe it was a monster. The sounds of battle continued. The comrades noticed that they were still fighting there. They needed to hurry to help. Mineria noticed something strange while looking at the mountain of corpses and equipment. She really wasn't imagining things. Among this whole mountain of corpses, the green-eyed priestess also noticed one of the leaders of the knights. It was the dead Sir Alex Sedmion, whose eyes were filled with fear before his death. Suddenly, a silhouette appeared before the priestess. It was undoubtedly a warrior, but it was unclear what clan he was from. The warrior, standing in a blue cloak with a huge blade, looked with disdain at the young priestess. After apologizing, he said that there should be no witnesses on this battlefield and swung his huge sword at the defenseless Mineria. Narek looked straight into the eyes of the enemy who dared to swing at the girl without a weapon. His rage knew no bounds. He used advanced fireball magic to catch his opponent off guard, while the swordsman who swung at Mineria did not expect to see magic on the battlefield. The enemy quickly realized that he was dealing with a magical blade. He assumed that she was a mercenary, adding that with the appearance of travelers, their work only increased. While the swordsman was analyzing the situation, he momentarily left reality. When he came to his senses, his gaze fell on the wizard. It was Gaston who could not just sit back and watch, but gathered his resolve and came up with a plan. The enemy knights quickly realized that there was a wizard on the battlefield and that this could very well affect the outcome of the battle. As Gaston had mentioned earlier, the order was given to attack the wizard. Narek also gave the order to protect the wizard at all costs until he gained enough mana for the colossal ability. The priestess sparkled, for bloodshed was not her method. If only she could influence anything. A light from the heavens descended upon the comrades. It was Mineria's magic. The battlefield was illuminated by her angelic holy magic. For a second, Narek thought that he would not want to fight the knights. if he did not take into account the fact that nothing could be changed because the knights were trying to kill them, and then he rushed into battle. He clashed blades with one of the enemy warriors. Mikkel, in turn, took a more defensive stance, using his shield against enemy swords. Dark, in the midst of battle, did nothing but analyze and notice that his allies were fighting much better than he expected, thinking for a second that perhaps they could figure it out themselves. But not the entire team fought on equal terms. Some were weaker. The knights did not forgive mistakes, so one of them, not missing the moment, knocked one of the allies to the ground. Looking at this, Ban realized that they couldn't cope without him. He would have to, because next to him were those comrades who accepted him into their company and started this journey together. At some point, it was Dark's turn. Two men with swords rushed at him, but if only they knew who they were attacking. The master of the dark arts never did without his natural, sometimes even frightening grin at such moments. Suddenly, the battlefield was illuminated by a light. Not the one that was angelic, thanks to the magic of the priestess. It was the light of a clap of thunder, against which Dark looked more epic than ever. Behind all of this was the wizard Gaston, who had finally accumulated enough mana to use the terrifying thunder and lightning technique. All the enemies on the battlefield were enveloped in chain lightning. The discharge was so powerful that it made no difference whether it was a natural phenomenon or the magic of a sorcerer. Its power was astounding. The enemies hit by the divine chain, lightning didn't even have time to blink before they immediately evaporated. Gaston asked Dark to buy him the maximum amount of time. Apparently, he needed a recharge. To the wizard's request, the swordmaster replied that magicians are quite useful if they have a protector. The sorcerer can rely on him. Unaware of their own helplessness, the remaining knights continued to try to attack the master of the dark arts, but their attempts were in vain. A powerful explosion thundered. It was none other than the famous fireball ability. It was released by Gaston, who was under Dark's protection. From the outside, one could say that it was an absolute protection for the sorcerer. The knights' eyes were filled with rage, and they were driven by revenge because the battle had not lasted long, and they had already suffered heavy losses. But no matter how many times they tried to attack the master of the dark arts, each of their attempts was unsuccessful. Dark, with one light movement of his hand, pierced the enemy soldier through and through. The half-dead knight, hanging on the blade of the swordmaster, most likely did not even have time to understand anything. This was evident from his empty eyes. Perhaps, in the end, he did not even understand why he died. At that moment, when the opponents looked around and tried to understand the colossal speed with which they were suffering losses, none of them could even imagine that he was next on the death list. Thanks to the devilish speed of the master of the dark arts, he felt like a god on the battlefield. Because no one could resist him, he could easily appear behind the enemy in a matter of moments to inflict fatal damage. At the moment of the attack, Dark could not understand what kind of power he was using at that moment, whether it was chi energy or the local mana, but the result was always the same. The riddled opponents didn't even have time to squeak, while the master of the dark arts inflicted damage on them that was incompatible with life. At one point on the battlefield, a frightened soldier called for help from a master. But even among masters, there are individual differences in skills and abilities, to which the master in the blue cloak said that this difference could be felt between him and Alex, who had just died a heroic death. The master in the blue cloak, who was initially hostile to travelers, also possessed magic. He could strengthen his sword. Could he really surpass Dark in strength? The Dark Arts Master quickly realized that the enemy had strengthened the sword not with mana, but with chi energy, which had been developed through special techniques and training by the Murima sages. The enemy disappeared from the band's field of vision. The executioner's speed of movement was slightly inferior to the devilish speed of the dark. Swinging in the air, the enemy shouted that he had never heard of a master using a saber. A master of the dark arts could anticipate any action from the enemy based only on his combat experience. And of course, Dark's invincible grin to catch the enemy off guard. Or maybe he's really that confident. The enemy noticed Ban's smile while delivering his signature blow, as if a guillotine descends on a man's head, seeing no obstacles and crushing the earth. But what was the surprise of the great executioner when, after his counterattack, only a small fragment in the form of a handle and blade remained of his blade. With one sure swing of his sword, the master of the dark arts repels the enemy's attack. Is there really no one in these lands who can match his speed and strength? The second part of the executioner's blade was sticking out of a nearby tree. If this had been a busy battlefield, the scattered remains of his sword could have easily taken a couple of lives of his subjects. The dark arts master, observing the opponent, thought that the executioner was about as strong as a first-class knight from the Black Death Squad. Could this really be all that the great master of this world could offer? With demonic speed, Dark used the Great Exaltation technique without any problems and stood with one foot on the master's head without him even having time to blink. The Dark Arts master couldn't help but smirk, annoyed that this was all he could do, such a huge opponent occupying a leading position in his squad. The master in the blue cloak, who realized the full gravity of what was happening, understood that his opponent was standing on his head, but he did not feel his weight. The Dark Arts master, known in the New World as Dark, used the 1,000-weight punishment technique he had learned at the demonic art school against his arrogant opponent. The other knights, one might say, witnessed the moment of execution of their master, who died in the blink of an eye. Looking at the remaining opponents with demonic eyes, Dark said that with such inferior skills and techniques, they had committed a grave sin by targeting a great master. The remaining knights didn't even have time to move before the master of the demonic school used, this time not a striking whirlwind, but a bloody hurricane of death. Dark, who had defeated the others at once, analyzed the situation on the battlefield. There were no survivors left. Everything seemed to be in order, except for Jimmy, who was the first to be knocked to the ground. Narek noted that after that master died, the morale of all the other soldiers fell, and he also assumed that he was the captain. The priestess Maneria stood in bewilderment at what was happening. On the one hand, they had crushed the enemies. On the other hand, she was so eager to help that she herself almost ended up being beheaded by the executioner in the blue cloak. Mikhail suggested that the young priestess forget about the details. The main thing was a victory without losses against the knights led by the master. Exchanging glances with the Narek, he searched his eyes for words of support for everything he had listed above, to which the leader replied that to some extent there had been luck in this battle, adding that the enemy was either tired or wounded. Unexpectedly for everyone, Dark abruptly used the elevation technique and rushed to the side. No one understood the course of his actions. As it turned out, apparently there was still one last enemy left. He was casting some kind of spell with unknown mana, as if it was not local mana. Rushing into battle, the master of the demonic school was not afraid of anything. But with sorcerers, it would be worth being careful until it becomes clear what technique the enemy is using, because Gaston distinguished himself in this battle with his skills from others and proved that jokes are bad with sorcerers.